Hi guys, and welcome to this let's call it a little tutorial, a little knowledge video to explain a little bit about our ears and how excuse me, the fact that our ears are different from one another will greatly influence how we perceive or how we hear a specific IEM. But what basically I'm saying is, if I take, let's say for the sake of argument, this Celeste Gumio, and I put it in my ear canal, and my ear canal has got a 30 millimeter length from the entrance to the eardrum, and I compare it with let's say my wife's ear canal, and her ear canal is 20 millimeters long from the entrance to the eardrum. The way that we will hear and perceive the gumio is going to be totally different, because those different lengths obviously will dictate different resonances internally in the ear. And so, as a reviewer, it becomes a little bit hard to sometimes try and convey what it is that I'm hearing. Also, when you take into account that when we measure the IEMs, the depth of insertion of that IEM will also give different results, and the tips that we use will give different results. All of these factors contribute to it being extremely ungrateful, or to try and sometimes give a correct image of what an IEM sounds like or what an IEM is capable of doing. I mean, before I carry on, I'll give you another example. Let's take the tenstion oxygen. Because of the physical dimensions that the shell has, it was an IEM that wasn't very easy to insert properly, and so it would sound absolutely amazing for those of us that were lucky to actually get it to fit nicely, and would sound like absolute garbage to others. It's very unfair. It's very complicated to try and transmit a proper idea of what something sounds like. And ultimately, I think that the best is to try and find people, and I try and identify or become identifiable to people that have the same kind of musical tastes that I do, and if a specific IEM sounds in a specific way, and that person that eventually might even buy that IEM also perceives it in the same way, then it's actually quite safe to say that we probably have the same tastes. Anyway, going back to the mechanics of eardrums and ear canals and ears in general. The physical dimension of the ear canal, its length, is very important. Its length and its shape, because our ear canals are not straight; they have bends. So the number of bends, and we usually have two main bends, one right away at the entrance, and then there's another bend halfway through the length of the ear canal. These two bends and the total length of the ear canal are the ones that are going to dictate certain resonance peaks that we will encounter. Obviously, I mean, just for the sake of maybe explaining a little bit better what I'm saying here, let me just zoom it in. So let's assume, for the sake of this what I'm trying to explain, that this is our ear canal, okay, and I'm just going to draw it straight, and at the end of that ear canal we have our eardrum, okay. Let's consider that as the eardrum. So this length here, this length is highly important to understand how the peaks are going to occur, and how that said earphone is going to sound, and also the way that we then insert the tip. And let's say, for the sake of argument, this is our tip, okay. If we are able to insert a tip at the entrance, and we leave it there, this is going to have a certain length again, and it's going to produce a certain sound or certain peaks of resonances. If we take that ear tip and it actually can come further down, the same IEM is going to sound completely different. So we have to be very careful when, or at least I want to try and be as careful as possible when I try and give you guys a perception of what an IEM sounds like. Okay, so as I was saying, just go back here. As I was saying, the length and the number of bends in the ear canal are two factors which highly highly affect the overall sound. And as well, let's keep in mind that the sound that we hear with IEMs is affected by our pinna, and the pinna is that little, that's part of the ear which is a little flappy. Okay, that part there that's a little flappy, and it's at the entrance of the ear canal. Okay, that will dictate how the frequencies above 1 kilohertz are then reproduced, and how they come across before reaching the eardrum. Yeah, that basically covers the first part of what I was saying. Talking more specifically about the length, a longer ear canal, okay, will usually yield resonance peaks that start early on. So, as I just mentioned, the above 1 kilohertz area is the area that is the most affected, okay, by our ear canal length and number of bends, and the compression of that ear canal as well, because it doesn't maintain its diameter always consistent. Okay, so if it's a longer ear canal, usually what happens is the earlier frequencies are after that initial pinna gain. So let's say, for the sake of argument, 3 kilohertz are the ones that are going to be more affected, and then later on, usually with an interval of 6-7 kilohertz, you have another peak. So in this particular case of a longer ear canal, let's say 3 kilohertz and then 10 kilohertz are the two main peaks that we'll have. If it's a shorter ear canal, usually that peak is taken out further, and it will maybe occur at around 5, 6, 6.5 K, and then with another peak occurring again at 12 or 13 K. This kind of explains, and you'll understand now, this explains the insertion depth of the tips when we are measuring it. How deep we are able to insert, and the amount of air that's left in front, the amount of volume that's left in front of the tip of the exit of the earphone until it reaches the measuring mic, or in this case the eardrum. That volume, that amount of air will shift and move back and forward depending on how much of it is there. Okay, so as a rule of thumb, longer ear canals, or if there's more space, more volume between mic and the output of the earphone, the lower the frequency of that initial peak will happen. The shorter that, the higher the peak. You've probably heard some of us talk about the coupler related peak at around 8K, and it's actually funny, when you insert it less, that peak moves from 8 to earlier on, so going exactly like I've just mentioned, because the ear canal or the ear or the difference has become bigger. And when we actually insert it deeper, and if I use a really small tip that allows me to actually insert the whole thing inside there, it moves up higher. It goes up to 9, maybe even 10K. I've had cases where it's actually reached almost 10K, that peak. So it's exactly what's happening in our ear. Not only the standard length of the ear canal is going to be important to determine where these peaks are, but then how deep we actually insert the earphone. There's a reason why the Etymotics are the way they are, because the Etymotics, what they want is to be able to reduce those peaks and push them out as further as possible to areas of the spectrum which they are not as audible, and take them away from that area where it is more audible, which is 2, 3, 4K. That's where the speech frequencies are, and if we have peaks there, we're going to be more sensitive to them. While as if we are able to push them out further to 12, 13, 14K, we will not be as sensitive. And this is they've accomplished this by actually being able to force the earphone, deep into your ear canal. Of course, not all of us like it. Some of us feel very uncomfortable by that way of using the earphone. I myself am one of those people, but I do occasionally like hearing my Etymotics, my two Etymotics, my SE and my XR, because it's actually quite interesting how they sound and how they are able to sound so satisfying using a very basic 6mm driver, and really nothing nothing too elaborate in terms of the hardware. Okay, as I was saying as well, and I just mentioned the 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 bends of the ear canal are also something which will affect where these peaks occur, and what frequencies will be more affected by them. And usually when the bends happen earlier on, or more pronounced early on, it has a tendency of lowering quite a significant manner the more upper frequencies. And by upper frequencies, I'm talking about frequencies above the 4 or 5K area. It has a tendency of really bringing them down. While if it's less pronounced, those bends, it doesn't lower those frequencies as much, and actually can create bigger peaks. Another factor which I mentioned, besides the length and the bends, or the actual compression. So does the ear canal maintain itself nice and consistent, or does it at any point compress? And where that compression again happens, it will boost a certain frequency. So if that compression happens in the beginning of the ear canal, or in the middle, a specific frequency corresponding to the remaining length and wavelength that length corresponds to in terms of frequency will be affected. So it's three factors which are highly determining, and that many times we just kind of forget about. It's way more way more complex, this whole thing of how something sounds, than what we think. I mean, when you listen to a normal home speaker, these differences are not as significant, because the sound source is further away, and then those millimeters of an ear canal that's 20, or an ear canal that's 24, or an ear canal that's 16 or 12 millimeters long, those differences there are not as pronounced, and so there will be a more commonality of things sounding more similar to a larger number of people. When we are talking about something where the sound source is at the beginning of basically a canal, which usually varies between 14 and 30 millimeters. That's usually the length of most ear canals. Everything is in a scale where small differences in the length highly affect the peaks that will occur. And so it's not an easy task for us as reviewers to many times try and convey what an earphone is going to be sounding like. Obviously, there are certain things that will be, let's say, standardized. But one of the takeaway messages that I can give, or one of my suggestions that I can give, is always try and find a way to put that IM as deep as possible into your ear canal with the widest possible bore, tip bore. The smaller the diameter of that tip, the more the peaks occur at earlier stages. and we want to push those peaks out further. So by using a wider bore, you're pushing those peaks out further. And also the wider bore has a tendency of opening up more in terms of the sound of the, in terms of the upper mids, presence, brilliance, the higher frequencies open up more as opposed of being compressed. Um, I've noticed, and this was actually something that a fellow colleague, Michael Bruce, picked up on, and I actually then started paying more attention to that. And it most of the times it actually is confirmed, which is when you find an IEM that graphs with a significant peak, significant dip after 8K. So if you have a significant dip at 8 to 11K, okay, and then with things going back to more or less the same level, what usually happens is that IEM acoustically creates a very large soundstage, has the ability of giving the perception of a very large soundstage. And I've tried a number of IEMs, and I've paid attention to that aspect, and it actually comes across as being correct 90% of the times, I would say. So yeah, the takeaway of this is try and always get a tip that is the widest bore possible that you can put into your ear, the deepest possible, and you will be very, very surprised with how different sounding things can be. I mean, for example, an example I'm going to give has to do with the audio neon. With the usual tip that I use, the 07, what happens is that the earphone, although it does have a nice long nozzle and does allow it for it to be inserted nice and deep, the earphone doesn't get inserted as deep and stays more or less at the entrance of the ear canal. And that came and gave me a sound which was good, but it sounded a little bit too energetic earlier on, and then I once tried these narrow bore medium-sized tips on the Neon Pro, and that allowed me to actually ram the earphone right into my ear canal, and the difference in sound was dramatic. I mean, it was dramatic. Gone was that peakiness that I was perceiving at around 2.5, 3K. It was gone. No longer was it being boosted, and it pushed everything out further. The conclusion I got from, or what I was able to take away from that, was that my ear canal is relatively long, and so the deeper I am actually able to put an earphone into my ear canal, the higher up I am able to push those peaks, and overall just have sound which is of course much more pleasing to me. Another one which is also suffering, or also not suffering, that also was a victim of the same situation, was my blessing, with this narrow, with this medium-sized tip of relatively wide bore, enabling me to put the earphone right into my ear. I got a completely different sound than what I was getting with the 07s, and it sounded good with the 07s, but it wasn't just pleasurable. Another one, which actually is an IEM that I tested recently, and over here I found the complete opposite. By putting it deep into my ears, the melody, the peak that it already has at around 5.5K was somehow more emphasized, and so by putting actually a wide bore tip, it enabled acoustically somehow for things to just match up nicely, in a more pleasant manner, and so I no longer feel that peakiness. It's actually something which is also happened with the BQEYZ Autumn. I found exactly the same situation happening with these two IEMs, and yeah, that's basically it. I don't want to drag on too much. So yeah, keep in mind that your ear canals or your ear canals, mine or mine, what I perceive or what I hear will be completely different to what you hear. I try as much as possible to, and that's one of the reasons why I give comparisons with so many IEMs, because ultimately one of those IEMs will be an IEM that someone might have that's listening to a review, and you will then be able to better understand how that particular IM that I'm reviewing will probably sound to you. Especially if what I mentioned about those other IEMs comes across as being the same as your perception of it, then obviously it enables us to find a commonality and a better understanding. Anyway, guys, I hope you like this little tutorial or little tech info that I'm giving, and I'm hoping to carry on giving more of this information to kind of show people that this hobby is way more complex than what we think, very, very complex, and I find it fascinating, honestly. Anyway, guys, as always, like and subscribe. Any questions that you might have, please feel free to ask, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.